Good morning, Berlin. So excited to be here for the inaugural Lead Dev Berlin. Such a great community of all of you people who want to level up, and that's what today's talk is about. As Mary said, I've written a number of books, and the most appropriate one is really about this one about talking with tech leads. So over my career, I know what it's like of you being a developer stepping into these shoes of being a leader, and I like to help people on that particular journey. One of the new things that I've been experimenting with is actually a newsletter called Level Up. You may be interested in this. I cover topics around leadership, technology, and also organizations and processes. So I like to share a lot of the information that I've been reading myself and hope that you benefit from it as well. And Mary also mentioned that I do make a course available. And this is really about for those people who are playing a dual role of still being able to code, but also responsible for leading a development team. But today we're going to go on a quest, and today we're going to have a look at what this means to be a lead developer. What's that typical journey? What are some of the challenges? And along the way, I'd like to share some of the stories, some of the tips, and uncover the way of the lead developer. Along the way, we'll be looking at a few challenges that you will find along this path. And what's interesting about this path is that all of us go on a particular leadership journey. All of us have different paths and different experiences. And so some of these challenges that we experience, you may experience all of these, you may experience none of these, but most likely you'll experience some of these, and many others we won't have time to cover. Your path will be unique, and I really emphasize that you understand your own strengths and understand how you tackle these challenges. On the quest, what's really important to do is to build up your own array of different skills. For each challenge, there may be an appropriate type of skill, but one thing you will find out is that there is no one skill that will work for all types of challenges that you have. So unlike a developer where you're thinking that one solution will fix lots of problems, you need to start building a toolkit that you can use in many different situations so you can actually understand how to overcome the challenges you will face that will surprise you. So make sure you build up your toolkit. And be careful. There are dangers along this path, and I hope to prepare you a little bit about how you might overcome these when you encounter these types of challenges. And along these challenges, you will be finding some interesting monsters. So Greek mythologies contained legendary beasts, like the Medusa with the snakes for her hair, who would turn people into stone. Or perhaps it's like the Minotaur, the man-eating bull, with the body of a man and the head and tail of a bull. But the creatures you will encounter along this path are a little bit different and aren't as well known as the ones in the Greek mythology. And what I ask from you, in particular, as you learn about these creatures and how to overcome them, that you share with other people warning signs and tips about how to overcome these creatures. So I hope you're ready for our quest, and I'm glad to be your guide today. As we start this journey, imagine yourself if you've never played this role before. Maybe you've started out as a developer, you have this conversation with the manager, and you're asked suddenly to play this role of a lead developer. You say, yes, I'm up for this challenge. I want a new growth opportunity. But what does this mean for you? What do you do differently? What is expected of you? These are very common questions that you have. So the first challenge that you will find is probably the default mode that you'll be working in. And this mode is really about this idea of a maker mode, right? In this common mode, this maker mode is what you've been trained in as a developer. It's the things you make, the things you create. In maker mode, you see the value through what you purposefully create. You see it through the code that you write and the products and the features that you enable through this code that you have. You get value and you get the positive feedback from customers saying, yes, I enjoy using this feature, I'm seeing usage through this. You also get a lot of value and you see your recognition through the problems that you personally solve. These interesting challenges that were very ambiguous, that you break down into small steps and work out how to overcome this particular challenge. And over time, you build up knowledge. You build up knowledge over your domain, you build knowledge over tools, and you become an expert in sharing this knowledge with different people. Being the person that people can go to and you have answers for this, and you get great satisfaction out of that. But I think we've just come across our first monster. And this monster is the mirror monster. Now, this creature is very unique. Seen in the shadows, sitting next to those people first playing this role as lead developer. And like Alice in the Looking Glass, this mirror monster does not only reflect what's going on, but it also changes the behavior of people. And unfortunately, unlike in Wonderland, these changes of the mirror monster are often quite negative. With the mirror monster at your side, your maker mode works in overdrive. The things that you got value out of, the code that you write, you start working in overdrive. You feel you need to write all the code yourself. You need to write the best code. You have so much pressure on yourself to be producing lots of features. You only want to be maybe involved in the really hard problems. You don't want to work on the easy stuff. You want to give that to other people, and you want to work on the challenging problems and solve even more things. And of course, because you are the expert, you want to be always right. You need to be the person that everyone goes to. Nobody else can answer questions. You need to be the winner in all battles and arguments. Let me tell you a story. One of the first projects that I worked on when I moved to the UK was with a very well-respected sort of leader. We were working on this complex form processing software, collecting lots of information, and we were really excited to be working with this particular leader. Now, this person was very well known for being a great teacher and gave us the whole idea of an object-oriented boot camp where we learned fundamental principles of object orientation. A lot of people were really excited to take part in this, and we were really excited to sort of apply this to the project context that we were working on. Now, if you ever learned something, you know you make a lot of mistakes along the way. And of course, we made a lot of mistakes in the code that we wrote as well. But what was kind of interesting is that we never really got feedback about the quality of our code. And our leader didn't seem to like some of the things that we produced. I remember one day in particular, we'd written lots of code, we were really proud of what we'd accomplished. We'd gone home that day, happy with what we'd sort of showcased to users, believing the code that we wrote was demonstrating a lot of these principles. Come back the next day to find out all of our code had been rewritten. How would you feel about that? How do you think we felt about this? We started to notice this pattern. There were parts of the code base that just kept getting rewritten, refactored. There were no mention about why. There was no lessons about this. And you can imagine what that does to the entire team. We started to become demoralized. Why would we bother writing all this good code when we knew one person would rewrite this? And this is definitely the mirror monster in action. The first step to overcoming the mirror monster is recognizing when you're operating in too much of this maker mode. It's important to be a maker, but too much is the wrong sort of approach. Instead, you need to move to being a multiplier. You need to shift your mindset away from the things that you create to multiplying the environment for other people to create. And multiplier mode is where you will add the most value as a lead developer. When you focus on multiplying others, instead of thinking of the code that you write, think about how you help other people write more code. A great metaphor is really thinking about it like gardening. What you're trying to do is create the best environment such that everyone can write the best code they can, such that everyone can solve the best problems, have help when they're having difficulties overcoming complex problems. Putting in a little bit of effort in this approach means that these seeds will bloom into flowers, trees, and a wonderful garden that you have created yourself. So shift modes to be a multiplier, and you will overcome this first challenge. Remember this old adage, what got you here won't get you there. The skills you developed as a developer won't help you be a great lead developer. Creating the right environment requires different skills, requires leadership skills, and this takes a different perspective. But once you recognize this and you start to build these leadership skills, then congratulations, you will have leveled up. Let's talk about our next challenge. And this one is really about thinking about the sorts of problems and solutions that we deal with on a day-to-day basis as developers. Think about the types of feedback that you might get when you're working as a developer. Perhaps you're doing test-driven development, and you have tests that go red, and you have tests that suddenly go green, giving you feedback about things are working. Perhaps It's you're working with users who tell you, this is exactly what I'm looking for or not what I'm looking for. You probably have product owners who are doing sign-off of stories. Perhaps it's about your continuous integration build, where you're putting together a system and you know it's working or it's not working. And maybe it's about deployments when you know those things have actually worked or not, right? An interesting thing about these situations is asking yourself, what do these things have in common? Well, one thing is that the feedback that you get is that they're binary, right? We're used to this yes or no, true or false type of feedback. And this is the mode of problem solving and feedback that we all get used to working as developers. Uh-oh, I think we've stumbled across our next monster. And in this one, this is called the switch monster. It's a nefarious monster that sits on your shoulder, really betting in this mode of binary thinking. It frequently attaches itself to your shoulder and whispers to you, reinforcing this idea that there is always one true answer. It continually nudges you towards this binary thinking, asking you, what is the correct answer to this problem? That there is this right answer, and that it simply needs to be found. To pick a solution, you just simply need to stand your ground and defend it with the might of your logic. What's interesting about this is this binary mode might be true for the world of programming with computers. That's kind of how they're built. But unfortunately, the switch monster is wrong when it comes to the scenarios that you'll be working with as a lead developer, and this is really about the world of people. The challenge of the lead developer is that you straddle two worlds, one of working in this binary world, and the other one of working with uncertainty in people. People are not computers. People cannot be programmed, as much as you might think they can. In this real world of people, you'll realize that blurry is the new binary. And this is really scary. What this means is that there's rarely a best practice. There is rarely a best solution. There is rarely a single solution that will work for all types of people. When communicating something, you will realize that some people perhaps prefer reading things, while other people would prefer listening. Some people don't mind talking in a large group. Others prefer one-to-one individual sort of conversations. You will never know what people will want, but you can be certain it will be different, and different from what you think that they need. Sometimes there is no good solution. It's good enough for now. As you get more information, you might actually change what your solution will be. And that's a hard thing to act as a developer when we're so certain with programs about whether or not a solution is correct. So in this real world of people, uncertainty, you always have to deal with trade-offs and a lack of information. So understand that solutions are never binary. Imagine yourself in a design discussion with a team. You're debating about this new application, and probably like today's world, do you build this application using microservices or a monolith? There are valid concerns on both sides, pros and cons, and the team can't quite come to a solution. So, do you step in and make a decision for them? The switch monster sitting on your shoulder is telling you, yes, of course, there is one way to do this, and you know what the correct way is. But remember that this switch monster is rarely correct when it comes to the world of people. In this example, it really depends. And the interesting question is, what does it depend on? We make decisions all the time, and so what are ways that you can actually think about these things? Some of the factors of how you want to decide and make decisions as a leader depend on things like the decision quality, right? If it's something that's easy, simple, reversible, maybe it's not so important. But if it's a critical building block that you won't be able to change in the future, that may be very, very difficult, and you may want to actually get more involved. Another element of this is really about how important it is for everyone to get buy-in. It's very hard for us to get buy-in from people if they've never been involved in the discussion, the process of what that solution looks like. Another element is really about the time. So something that needs to be made quickly, something that needs to be made immediately, might need to have a little bit more of a different decision-making process than something that doesn't need as much time. One of the decision-making models that you can think of is one called Vroom-Yetten decision-making. In this model, you choose different modes of thinking depending on what type of decision you're making. So one of the modes is something called dictatorial, right? You can just simply state what the solution is. You probably do this when you decide where you want to go for lunch as a team. I'd like to go to this place for lunch today. You don't necessarily need to have a big discussion around that. You might take an autocratic style of decision-making, where perhaps you refer to a couple of key people, but you're still making the decision yourself with a little bit more input from people. Another style is perhaps something called consultative, where you ask for lots of opinions from different people, you become informed, but you reserve the right to actually make the choice yourself. And the one that you're probably most used to is the democratic or the consensus-based decision-making, where you're asking the team to perhaps vote or decide on what the outcome should be. So remember that there are multiple ways to make a decision, and it depends on a couple of different traits around the quality, around the commitment, and the time needed. Even something as simple as democratic voting isn't as simple as it might look like, and there's actually more than one way to actually vote. One of my favorite techniques of this is something called Roman voting. So some of you may be familiar with this. In Roman voting, you ask people, are people for a particular solution? And they say, yes, I am. And now other people who are maybe completely against it are people who are going to say, no, I don't want the solution. But like a lot of groups, you probably have some people who don't really care what the outcome is, or that they're happy to go with the majority. And so Roman voting also has an idea of, I'll go with what the majority of the group says. So even something as simple as democratic voting is also not a simple binary choice. Collect your own mental models and ways of looking at the world and appreciate that people have different preferences. They have different styles. Remember that no one solution will work for everyone, and deal with the uncertainty because blurry is the new binary. And once you accept this, once you look at it through different lenses, congratulations, you will have leveled up. Our third challenge is really about this path and what it focuses on, and thinking about how you demonstrate your own behavior. So how you say something matters almost as much as what you're actually saying. You're always in this role model position. People are looking at what you do, how you say it, and listening to what you actually say. And all of these sets the tone and behavior for the rest of your team. Now imagine you have a customer problem, you don't really want to deal with it, it's been a nagging problem for some time, but all of a sudden it gets escalated and it needs to be dealt with. How do you communicate this to the team? One way you might say is say, here's a really annoying problem. Such a waste of time, but we have to do it anyway. Can you take care of this? Alternatively, you might have something that says, here's a really challenging problem. Our customers would really appreciate this if we can solve it. Let's start working on this together. Now, this is very interesting because you might compare these solutions. Which one is more likely to motivate and encourage people to take this problem up and be engaged to solve it in the best possible way? Which one will result in the best internal intrinsic motivation and the quality for the customer? Now, you probably have this internal dilemma. Ooh, this feels very uncomfortable. When I present this, I often have this different sort of thought. That's not telling the truth, right? And this is our binary monster coming out again. So it's an interesting question to ask, what is truth? Let's have a look at a couple of examples. So, is something boring or interesting? Right? It depends. What is boring may be interesting to another person. That is a value judgment. That's your perspective on that. What is easy or hard? Something may be easy because somebody has been trained in something. They've been doing that activity for a very long time. And what may be easy for that person may be really difficult for a new person, but also a learning opportunity for that person to take something on they've never done before, a growth opportunity. What is something that is innovative versus known? What's really interesting in the world that we live in is that we have formed communities, and what is known in one community gets imported into a different community and becomes an innovation. So one of the things you start to learn about this challenge is really understanding that sometimes truths aren't as clear-cut as we believe them to be. I love this quote. There are 3 sides to every story, yours, theirs, and the truth. And there is some truth to this. Right? One of the interesting models that you can think about is something called the ladder of inference. comes from a person called Chris Argyris, and explains why that when we actually take in the same scenario, we may end up with very different perspectives and outcomes as a result. Now, why do people result in this way? Well, one thing is we have limited time, we have limited attention. So what's happening around us is reality and facts. But because we have limited attention and time, we're only observing a certain amount of that reality, right? So I can see behind you, you're looking at me, and there's things that I'm missing as well. So we select reality intentionally or unintentionally. And after we've selected those facts, we interpret the reality. We apply that judgment. Is it easy? Is it hard? Is it boring? Is it interesting? And then based on these interpretations, we make assumptions. Often we project our own assumptions onto other people. You understand this when you hear things like, they meant that. They wanted to do that. You never really know because you don't know what's happening in somebody else's head. And based on that, we come to conclusions, and conclusions about perhaps what should be done that drive our belief, and that results in the actions, and that's the externality about what we decide to do. And the amazing thing about our brains is that it happens so rapidly that we don't even take notice. And so here's the trap. It's along the way that it's where our assumptions and what we interpret reality to be is where we actually differ. And so these are the points where you as a leader need to catch yourself of if you're jumping to conclusions, or other people are jumping to conclusions, and you need to work out where people have come from. So some well-known examples about this in action is the front of the cube at the front or the back? Right? Is this a glass, or are these two faces? Is this a duck, or is it a handle, or a rabbit? There are many different perspectives, and it's very interesting because there is no one way of seeing it right. It depends on which model you're looking at it through and what your actually default assumptions are. So we go back to this idea, we interpret things differently, we have different assumptions. So remember that it's not necessarily a single truth out there. And I think we've encountered our last monster. And this monster is the moan monster. And the moan monster is infamous amongst developer communities. This monster is insidious because it tunnels in through your ear and wraps itself around your brain. It changes how you perceive things. It tells you all the things that could possibly go wrong. What's not perfect, why this solution doesn't work, what problems exist, why it'll never work. Although useful in small doses, allowing the moan monsters to spend too much time, particularly in you as a lead, leads to an infection that you want to get rid of. And one of the tools you need to think about is really thinking about how you communicate consciously. With a moan monster, you need to think about what mode of communication that you're actually operating in. And there are 3 modes you might actually want to consider. So the first one, which is probably your default one through the moan monster, is looking at all the possible things that could go wrong, always focusing on what's terrible, the bad sides, and what needs fixing. Another mode is really thinking about empathizing, asking questions, listening and verbally recognizing other people's feelings, other people's interpretations of what reality is like. And the third mode is really about motivating, helping people to understand what's wrong, but helping them find ways to move forward and paint that bright picture that people can take care of and want to take part of. All of these options are in your toolkit, but ask yourself, which one do you use all the time? And with this moan monster, it's dangerous to always stay at the side. And what you want to do is really move towards people, to really listening to people and understanding what they can do, and then find ways to motivate them and encourage them to take on these new challenges and successes. Make sure that people understand what maybe difficult challenges are opportunities for growth. Make sure that something that may be scary might actually lead to a lot more happiness in the future if they feel supported at actually tackling these challenges. And when you start to understand you need to motivate over moaning, then congratulations, you will have leveled up. So we slowly reach the end of our quest together, and I hope that you've had a small amount of insights into some of the challenges and some of the monsters that lie on your path to being the lead developer. It's been a pleasure being your guide, and I hope that you've learned a lot of lessons, added a few more tools to your toolkit that will make you a lot more effective in this role as a lead developer. Remember to shift modes from being a maker to a multiplier, Don't focus on what you personally produce, but what you enable other people to produce and the greater output of the team rather than what you do. Remember that blurry is the new binary. You can't cope with a single true answer. There is no right and wrong. There are only different ways of seeing things, and you really want to understand what those different ways are. And finally, remember to motivate people over simply moaning. Perspectives matter, how you interact, how you communicate matter, and make sure that you motivate people to inspire them and drive them to success. As I mentioned before, we've had time to only cover a few of the challenges and monsters along the way, and I'm sure that over time you will uncover many more along this quest. But with a few of these tools, I hope that you've leveled up, and that this journey is never really to end. And I wish you all the best to being the lead developer, and that you discover your own way. Thank you.